next honoree is going to be recognized by a winner already. But Dan Blitzer is someone that has educated and touched so many people and has asked all those extra questions that Paul and others have talked about. So Jan, please introduce Dan.
I have probably known Dan Blitzer as long as anyone in the lighting industry today, almost from the start of his career. It was early 1980, a few months after he arrived in the San Francisco Bay Area to sell for Lightolier. When it came to lighting, he was green, and I don't mean environmentally friendly, but he had an appropriate modesty and, more importantly, a lot of curiosity, passion, and dedication. Dan is such an open and friendly person. We hit it off right away. When I was the DLF president in San Francisco, he served as my vice president. That was a blessing. We accomplished a lot and had a lot of fun. With his family connections at Lightolier, I could see that Dan would return east soon. He said he wanted to stay 5 years, but he only lasted 3. Back at Lightolier headquarters, Dan held various management roles in sales and marketing, but as his mom had always said to him, he wanted to teach. In 1992, he left the company to form the Practical Lighting Workshop, a consultancy. It continues today. In 2003, Dan began a relationship with Philips Lighting Application Center, serving as principal faculty until the facility closed in 2019. In 2008, he started working with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory on various LED projects. In 2020, the IES tapped Dan to develop Introduction to Lighting and later to update lighting fundamentals. Most recently, but not finally, Dan assures me he has joined faculty at the New York School of Interior Design. Dan was named a Fellow of the IES in 2016 and given a Distinguished Service Award last year. For over 30 years, he's been a board member for both the Knuckles Fund for Lighting Education and the Designers Lighting Forum. Dan exudes curiosity and passion and remains dedicated. Maybe he's not so modest anymore. A few years ago, he was my interviewer for the IES as they started to record Lighting Trailblazers before it was too late. As always, he erased my hesitation and my nerves, and telling him stories was fun. Please welcome my dear friend, Dan Blitzer.
Thank you, Jan. And before I thank Randy and the judges, I'd really like to thank everybody who's still on their feet. Very, very impressive. I'm truly privileged to share this space with so many people who are so talented, and I have been fortunate to know over the, I won't count them, years. Earlier, I like to ask people how they get into our business, and Jim Bainey, just a little while ago, answered the question for me. And so I'll tell for myself. How did I get into the lighting business? I spent 5 years in finance. Thank you, Jim. Before I did that, I had an opportunity to go to Lightolier, obviously, family company, and there had just been the first recent oil crisis. You can figure out the time at that point. And I knew from my education in economics that if the cost of a product rises, and of course, energy and electricity is part of the cost of lighting, the demand is going to go down. So therefore, it would be the end of the lighting industry. Just shows you what a college education does for you. So I did finally call up Lightolier, and they were noticeably cool. What do you want to do? I said, I'd like to be a salesman. Fantastic, come right in, we'd like to have you. I don't know what they were worried about, but at any rate, that's how I wound up going to San Francisco. In some respects, it was a terrible choice. Through probably 5 or 6 years of bad business and bad behavior, Lightolier had fallen from the top of the marketplace, which it literally dominated, to the bottom. It was, as people said at the time, scorched earth. such that, I could get laughed out of people's offices, literally, feet on the desk, right in my face. And there was no room for somebody who didn't know anything, of course, to visit with the senior decision makers in the major engineering and design firms. Fortunately, the Bay Area had a talented cadre of young designers, witness Jan, and many others who had time and had access because the senior agents really wanted to talk to the senior principals. So there was room, at any rate. So that was good, and there was entry there. But I'd like to identify somebody that Jan mentioned, and that was Fran Kellogg-Smith, who was more advanced in her career, of course, but she still had time for a neophyte. And I owe to her many, many after-hours conversations about lighting. And I think a fair amount of my continuing interest in this business is due to the young people I met, as well as people like Jan and others. So I was back in New York, and hundreds of Lightolier and its customers made a reality of the longtime Lightolier catchphrase, do it first, do it better, make a life as you make a living, especially that last part. Some of them are past, some retired, and others are now leaders in other companies, like Jim Lee and others who are not here. I worked for Zia Eftekar, the president, for most of my time at Lightolier. It was a turbulent and ultimately disappointing time in the 1980s. But I'm particularly grateful because Zia helped me to outsource myself by supporting a flow of work to my newly formed consultancy, the Practical Lighting Workshop. One of the projects was writing the history of Lightolier for its 100th anniversary, and with that, 20 or so interviews of past and current employees, including, of course, Bill Blitzer. Bill glossed over all the questions of history. He didn't want to talk about it. All he wanted to talk about was what was new, what was happening, what was coming. History meant nothing to him all the way through. Bill and I actually only collaborated directly on one project at Lightolier, and that occurred after we had both left the company. Interesting how family works. The interviews prompted Addison Kelly, co-chair of the New York Section History Committee, to recruit me as an interviewer for the IES Video History Project. Over the last 15 years, the ongoing project has completed more than 25 interviews of some really significant people, not me, all the way through. In 2003, it was Mark Rausch, then at Philips, who asked me to join the outside faculty that he was building at the Lighting Application Center in New Jersey. Actually, I asked him because the faculty included Gary Gordon, co-founder of the Knuckles Fund, Craig Berniker, who was there, and Paul Hafner. So it was a great place to feel like you could learn and teach at the same time. Sadly, Paul is no longer with us. How many people here, anybody here know of Paul Hafner? Well, if you'd met him, thank you. If you'd met him, you'd recognize him. He was a bull. He was an unabashed door-to-door vacuum salesman. But he really believed in helping people learn with their hands as well as with their eyes and ears. And he taught me a great deal in that area. Later, Mark and I partnered for the last 5 years or so of the LAC till it closed. I'd worked with Rita Harold briefly when we were both at Lightolier. Several years after, when she was managing technical services for the IES, she invited me to develop a study guide to the NCQLP exam for the IES. Another former colleague, Nancy McCoy, also from San Francisco, introduced me to the American Lighting Association, where I took her role as a continuing educator. Rita later connected me to the Next Generation Luminaires competition, of which there are a number of people who participated in that all the way through, as well as several ongoing projects at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Some of you may know Ruth Taylor, project manager, who's let me hang around there for a while, and I'm very grateful. I got to know Tom Butters when he ran Canlight's Lighting Concept Center in Toronto. How many people know Tom? Yeah, I've got a few names here that not everybody knows. So we were both working at Phillips educational areas. Okay. Am I running out of time? Am I running up the time? I'm okay? All right, because I would like to say something about Tom. Tom would say that their utilization rate, number of students in the facility per day or year, was 4 times that we had in New Jersey, which was true. Nevertheless, he let me develop educational materials for the IES when he was director of education. Still later, he encouraged me to join him at the Lighting Angora, his current enterprise. And I don't know if she's still here. She was here. Brienne, are you still here? Yes. And Brienne, who picked up Tom's responsibilities as well as many, many more, really collaborated on those projects. Not long before leaving Lightolier, I'm jumping around in the time frame, Jeffrey Millam invited me to join the board of the Knuckles Fund for Lighting Education. Both Frank Conti and Paul Gregory have served on the board, successfully raised funds for it, and guided, importantly, decision-making. We miss you. We really, really do. Since its inception, and this is important, the fund has made over $2 million in grants to universities, educators, and students, helping to sustain the lighting community through education. It is truly important. About the same time I joined the board of the Designers Lighting Forum of New York. The DLF, of course, operates, where are we all going to be tomorrow? Leducation, you bet. Whose remarkable success owes absolutely nothing to me. No. The dedicated team, led by Bert Grant and, importantly, Carolyn Rinker, has built Leducation into the preeminent lighting event in America. Its popularity has helped the DLF to contribute significantly to the Knuckles Fund. It all ties together. Thinking back on 45 years in lighting, the connections far outweigh any achievements. I wish I could have named everybody who opened doors and, more importantly, pushed and pulled me through them, but I can't. Let me close by saying how grateful I am to this industry that lights up our lives, and to all those whose lives have touched and enriched mine so far. Thank you all very much.